Hi, it's Gabrielle, and this is your Power Couple Relationship Tip. So today we're going to talk about the stages of intimate relationship. So grab a cup of coffee because we're going to talk about the ups and downs of relationships, so it's time to settle in for a story. Now, before we do that, if you like what you've been learning in these videos, please hit the subscribe button and give this a thumbs up, and remember to leave me your comments below. How many of you have been madly in love with somebody only to wake up one day and find that the relationship is profoundly changing and you don't have those same feelings of passionate, intense love that you once did? Why do you need to know about these three stages? It's because if you don't understand the three stages, you're likely to get to a point where things really start to change. And what you need to know is that that's actually natural. We're not, we start out being in love, but we're not meant to be in that high state for the entire duration of our relationship. In fact, as a couples therapist, I've often had couples come in and one person is saying, I don't know what happened. We were so in love and one day those feelings just weren't there anymore. And I'm worried that that means that we shouldn't be together. But if you understand what's going on, you'll understand that this is an entirely normal thing. So today we're going to talk about exactly what's happening and exactly what you need to know in order to build a fantastic relationship. Okay, so let's talk about the stages of relationship. Well, there are basically three stages of relationship. And what we know is that the first stage is the falling in love stage. And essentially, our brains are on drugs during that first stage, meaning that our brain is kind of mixing up this perfect neuro cocktail of biochemicals that make us feel amazing. And those chemicals involve everything from testosterone to vasopressin to norepinephrine to dopamine to oxytocin. There's just a whole litany of brain chemicals that get produced when we fall in love. And what those brain chemicals are designed to do, essentially, is to make us feel like getting together with the other person, getting together in a big way. Obviously, that has a big evolutionary advantage because from the perspective of evolution, we need to reproduce in order to carry on our species. And so Mother Nature has its way of making sure that we get together. And this is the way that Mother Nature does that. Now, this initial stage of this kind of brain high that we have applies whether you're straight or gay, whether you're falling in love with a member of the same sex or the opposite sex. It applies across the board. And it gives us a lot of different kinds of experiences all at once. So one of those is the a tendency to obsess about the other person. We can't sleep, we can't eat. All we can think about is the other person. We long to be with that other person. And this incredible sort of euphoric feeling of love and connection and softness and sweetness. And so because we're sort of in this brain fog of drugs, we can't actually see the other person for who they really are. And again, that's part of making sure that, we're going to overcome any sort of faults that might be there in order to make sure that we can procreate. So we tend to be very, very bad at really seeing a potential partner objectively in the very beginning of the relationship. The next stage is what we could call the conflict stage. And what happens is, in that stage, is that at some point in the relationship, you and your partner are going to have some sort of disagreement, like your first big fight. And a lot of people remember that first big fight that they had. And that is actually a critical moment in your relationship journey together, because depending on how you and your partner handle that first fight is going to determine which direction you go. If you guys are able to get through it in a way that both of you come out of that fight feeling right side up, feeling like you know how to fight without anybody really getting hurt. You're really laying the groundwork for a way of being together that is sustainable, that is non-threatening, that you know you can get into trouble with each other, but you know how to get out of trouble. But on the other hand, maybe you get to that point where you have that first big fight and it goes so badly that it ends the relationship. And I'm sure many of you can, relate to times in your life when that happened. You were madly in love with somebody, and then one day you guys had this enormous fight, and boom, it's over. Now, what happens in this second stage around the time that you two are, having your fight and things are really starting to change is you're also making this kind of decision about, are we in or are we out? Are we going to make a go of it, or is it time to call it off? And if you decide that you're going to be together, at a certain point, something starts to change inside your brain. And suddenly, you guys have the possibility of becoming what we call attachment figures for each other. Now, an attachment figure, if you've been watching the previous videos, you know that an attachment figure is a special person who you bond with, and in childhood, that person is usually your parent, one or both parents, with whom you have a special bond. But then in adulthood, that person is usually your significant other. And so at a certain point in the relationship, the two of you decide to commit. And that might be signaled by moving in together. It might be signaled by just deciding to only date each other. Could be signaled by deciding to get married. There are a lot of different things that can sort of create that change in the brain. But regardless of what it is, at that point, something really starts to happen inside you, which is that you start to relate to your partner as an attachment figure. And what that means is that your brain starts to see your partner through the lens of all of your previous attachment figures. That means through the lens of your relationship with your parents when you were little, as well as the previous romantic relationships that you've had. Now, you can imagine that if those relationships didn't go so well, then that is going to create a lot of problems for you in your current intimate relationship, because suddenly you are having all of those same fears and all of those same vulnerabilities come up. Because if, let's say, you've been hurt in the past and suddenly you're afraid that those kinds of hurts are going to happen again. So this is why it's so important that we understand our attachment history, which is what we've been talking about, so that you guys can actually resolve those patterns and not have to live them out with each other. So we've covered the first two stages of the relationship, first one being the falling in love stage, second one being the big fight, which also signals kind of a choice. Are we in? Are we out? And then the third stage is really when we move into that level of commitment. We've chosen to do this. We are committed to a long-term relationship. And that's when we really start to function from these early attachment patterns that I was talking about. So it's really at that third stage that the real work of relationship begins, because we're no longer seeing each other through that fog of those brain drugs, and now we have a much more realistic vision of who our partner is, hopefully, because we've gotten to know them over time. And depending on how our history went and how much self-awareness we have, is going to have a lot to do with the kind of relationship that we build with our partner. So in stage 3 of the relationship is when the two of you really move into a deeper, committed, long-term, intimate relationship. And that's really when you have decided we're in this together and we're going to build a relationship that's based on commitment and trust. So here's where the rubber really meets the road and where the tools that you're learning in these videos are really going to help you. Because these videos are largely about how to find the right person and then build a committed, intimate relationship with them that is going to stand the test of time. And as you'll find in these videos, in order to do that, we know that long-term, committed, intimate relationships need to be based on certain kinds of behaviors, certain kinds of principles, and that's exactly what you're going to be learning about in these videos. So what power couples know is that relationships naturally evolve through these 3 stages, and it's important that you're aware of these stages so that you don't think something's wrong when your feelings start to change as the relationship deepens. If you liked what you learned in this video, remember to subscribe to this channel, give this a thumbs up, and leave me any questions you have about the 3 stages of relationship in the comments below. And also, you can go to thepowercoupleformula.com for a lot more information about building a wonderful relationship. And I'll see you in the next video. There's a lot more I could have said there.
I know.
Oh, you can make my little...